Talking financial organization and a professional practice does not have to be boring. Are you ready for a few money in, money out ideas? It's Susan Gunn coming directly to your head to make you think. Can you handle the truth? Because she is known for being energetic, laughs a lot, and gives honest, sometimes direct, but always practical advice. It's time now for Money In, Money Out.
Years ago, I received an autographed copy of a book that I found completely intriguing and have consequently picked up so many times through the years. In fact, during my pandemic house cleaning, it was one of the few books that I didn't donate. The Millionaire Next Door, The Surprising Secrets of America's Wealthy, written in 1996 by Thomas J. Stanley and William D. Danko, both PhDs who studied, wrote, and spoke on affluency. Dr. Stanley tragically passed away in 2015 from the hands of a drunk driver. That's really sad. Took him way too soon. And from what I understand, he was working with his daughter on another book. And Dr. Danko is now retired. It is such a very well-prepared research about America's rich and how they became rich. They studied 292 millionaires and their financial habits. It's intriguing, and it probably would surprise you, as it did me the first time reading through. I had always thought millionaires had that much money because it was family money. You know, I live in the South. Family money rules through inheritance, passed down through generations. In reality, the authors of this book, through their studies, determined it was very seldom inheritance. It was seldom advanced degrees or intelligence, but ultimately the result of hard work, diligent savings, and living below your means. Typically, first generation and self-made. It's stunning, and it's a stunning read that's still relevant 24 years later. In December, I was talking to my friend CPA Kate Willeford about this book and found she had read it and loved it as much as I did. And after a brief discussion, we decided it would be fun to talk about this book in a podcast. She is my most frequent guest on the podcast, so it's really hard to come up with a really new introduction to introduce Kate. She's a longtime friend. She's a dental CPA. She's an amazing gal, full of information. I'd say full of it, but that's a whole different another definition, and always brings valuable information to the desk. So here she is today with us again. Hi, Kate.
Hi, Susan. It's great to be back again.
Yeah, we kind of didn't plan this one, but we're both excited about it.
That's right. Well, thanks for having me. And I think now is the perfect time to be talking about ways in which people can become wealthier, even in spite of a pandemic.
Yeah, and I kind of had a little bit of an internal contradiction, I guess I'd say, about focusing on wealth because, you know, money doesn't buy everything. We all know that. But that's not what we're trying to say. We're not trying to say you need to focus on money buying everything. But what we are trying to say is the wealthy didn't have as much of a problem this last year. And they're the ones that have set the boundaries, I guess is how we'd say that, right, Kate?
Right. And I really feel that what money does for you is it buys freedom. What I tell my clients is that you really want to save enough money for the future so that you're working one day because you choose to go to the office, but not because you have to see those patients.
That's a really good way to put it. And that's exactly what I would say. If you were wealthy in the terms of what we'll talk about, then you would have been not chained and not in bondage for what happened this last year.
That's right. My most successful clients who had saved the most money were amazing in their attitude towards the pandemic. And it really changed their perspective because I did have some clients, as I might have mentioned before, actually, on one of our earlier podcasts, that when all of this hit and they were required to be closed, instead of stressing over it, they were able to say, I'm taking my kids to the lake. We're going to be gone for 6 weeks. We'll come back and then see where things are then. And that's really what being wealthy does for you because it gives you that flexibility. And I feel like there's a negative association sometimes or connotation with this word wealth.
Yeah.
But really, being wealthy doesn't mean having money that you're spending all of the time. It's not the visual spending that we see, but creating wealth is really all about saving money and not spending it. And that's a positive thing.
Well, that's exactly what the book talks about. I mean, the book's intro really set the tone for what followed. Their study revealed that the people who lived in expensive homes and drove luxury cars did not actually have much accumulated wealth. In fact,
That's right.
here's a quote from the book. Who becomes wealthy? Usually the wealthy individual is a businessman who has lived in the same town for all of his adult life. This person owns a small factory, chain of stores, or a service company. He is married once and remains married. He lives next door to people with a fraction of his wealth. He is a compulsive saver and investor. He has made his money on his own. 80% of Americans' millionaires are first generation rich. Isn't that amazing?
It really is. I mean, it's very interesting because it's the opposite of what we typically think of as a wealthy person. Because you're right, this person is not normally spending their money in ways that can be seen. And so you wouldn't expect that that person actually has all of that wealth.
Yeah, so the authors did surveys, as I mentioned, 292 millionaires they surveyed and interviewed, and they determined there were 7 common factors, traits between all of them, which I think is interesting. 7. There's 7, and I'll tell you the 7, but we're only going to be able to talk about 3, and let's see if we even make it through 3 with Kate and I expounding on everything. But we'll hopefully get through 3. But the first one is the wealthy live below their means, well below their means. The second one is they allocate their time, energy, and money efficiently in ways conducive to building wealth. The third is they believe that financial independence is more important than displaying high social status. The fourth is, I love this one, and unfortunately, we're not going to have time to talk about it, but it's amazing. Their parents did not provide economic outpatient care. That's a little tongue in cheek, isn't it? The fifth is their adult children are economically self sufficient. Of course, 5 follows 4. The sixth one is they are proficient in targeting market opportunities. And the seventh one is they chose the right occupation. So today we're going to talk about the first 3 of the factors. If you want to read about the others, the book is available on Amazon and there is an audio version on Audible. I'll provide the links to the books in the show notes just to let you know. So Kate, let's talk about that first one. The wealthy live well below their means. You and I both can laugh about that one because I had to laugh when at the bottom of one of the pages, the author states what the words are that profile the affluent. Frugal, frugal, frugal. I mean, oh my gosh, I laughed so hard and thought my dad had to have written this book.
That's right.
I mean, seriously, your granddad recently celebrated his 100th birthday, and he was the first generation of 3 generations of accountants, being the father to your dad, Rick. I have a feeling that your granddad, with him going through the Great Depression, he was probably frugal, 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 just like my dad.
You're right. He is. And he did just turn 100 a week ago. And we're so excited because he's also in really good health, too. But, that was an interesting generation because he was lifetime Navy and retired as a Navy captain in addition to being a CPA. And so, with that generation, that meant that he's a triple dipper. So, he has income coming in from various sources. And it was key that because he had been frugal and had saved so much money, that he's able to take care of himself and live in this amazing retirement community that is so high end and has just done an excellent job of taking care of our family members during this whole COVID situation. And so that has meant he's not passing on financial issues to his son and daughter that would be the next generation down. And that's, one of the issues that you mentioned that is key is really being able to be independent and provide for your current expenses and also your future expenses for yourself and your spouse without having to push that burden on someone else.
Well, yeah, because they don't think about, I mean, I do because both my parents lived to be in their 90s. Mom passed at 97 and dad at 94. And dad used to joke and say, we didn't budget to live this long. But he did an amazing job. I mean, they still traveled around the whole country in an RV and they took
Mm-hmm.
cruises and they did fun things. But oh my gosh, he put C in the word cheap. But I mean, he was frugal, frugal, frugal. We used to say that all the time. And oh my gosh,
Mm-hmm.
he would cut corners and you know, but it worked. It totally
Mm-hmm.
worked. And mom was down to not having a whole lot of money left in the end. In fact, not having much at all. But a lot of that had to do with medical expenses and the cost of
Right.
medical. And so we
Right.
don't think about that and having to kind of plan ahead. And dad had real estate. I know a lot of dentists are getting into real estate of owning the practice building and keeping that as income down the road and then selling it when they need it. And that's essentially kind of what dad did. Dad did. He was a home builder and he would flip properties and then rent them out. And
Mm-hmm.
he would sell one at a time as they need money in the bank account.
Well, I
So,
think as people are trying to plan for the future, I think it's important to look at making sure your money lasts until 99. Now, you might have unusual circumstances in your family where you need to use a different number, but I think people need to have a tendency to be planning now for a longer period of time that they'll be using the money. And I think they should also not necessarily assume that they're going to be in a lower tax bracket when they pull the money out, which means, again, saving
right,
even more. Because what I typically find when my clients retire, they spend more money. So they're pulling more money out of their retirement plans in the first few years, which puts them in a higher tax bracket because they're now wanting to go do some of those fun things that they haven't
right.
been able to do before. So I think saving more is going to be key. And the other thing that I just thought of as you were talking about that situation with your family is looking at long term care insurance. That's something I myself have. And I think it's
Me
important
too.
to look at that, when you're in the right age range to consider it. There's a period of time where it's more affordable. But then as you get older, and certainly as you're over 55, that may not become as affordable. But looking at that when you're really young, I think can make sense to do. Look, it's never inexpensive when you buy it in the first place. But if you look at ways in which you're providing for your own healthcare in the future, as well as your living expenses, is a very wise thing to do. And wealthier people are doing that because it's a way to, again, make sure you're independent and you're not pushing a burden onto your kids.
That's a really good point. One of the other quotes in the book that I really liked said even most households with six-figure annual incomes are not affluent. They believe in spending tomorrow's cash today. They believe in spending tomorrow's cash today. I see that a lot. They are debt prone and are on earn and consume treadmill. Too many of them, those who do not display abundant material possessions, are not successful. To them, non display oriented people are their inferiors. I've seen that a lot. I know you have too.
Well, it's the classic case of wanting to keep up with the Joneses,
Oh
and I'm
yeah.
hoping we're going to see some changes in this as a result of the pandemic. I've talked for a long time about the need for budgeting and cash flow planning and savings plans, but not many of my clients actually want to start to work through those budgets and create some goals for themselves. But I think we're starting to see a large increase in that because more and more people are realizing how less stressful this closure would have been if they had had some money saved up. I recommend that they save a minimum of 6 weeks of practice expenses and home expenses so that they would be able to survive at least 2 months of spending, probably. And then, of course, they should be saving even more than that, but that's a starting point. And what we actually have seen nationwide is an increase in savings during this time. Over the last number of years, we've only seen savings of about 6 to 8% per year in America on average. And right now, we're seeing that closer to 17%. Because what's interesting is people have cut their spending during this period of time, so they're actually saving more money because they're spending less. They're not traveling as much and they're not going to some of the services that they used to go to. But we're also seeing in dental practices specifically a significant amount of savings there because while collections dropped, they spent so much less money on overhead that net income increased, I'm finding, at least 6 to 8% by year end. And when you couple that with receiving the PPP money and the
Oh yeah.
HHS relief funds, that's actually created the most cash that many of these practices have had in a long time. Many of them are sitting with over $100,000 more than they normally have in their bank accounts right now.
Yeah, that's and you and I talked about that before, and that's a real area that could be potentially hot for embezzlement. And
That's
so,
right.
especially if they don't know their spending or what's going on. And I'll tell you that one of the things that I've seen, not all of my cases, let me be clear. Um, the doctor lives in a really expensive house and drives a really expensive luxury car to the practice. And someone around the front desk area starts comparing their life with the outward possessions of the doctor,
Mhm.
not knowing that the doctor really didn't have the money to spend on that, that the doctor is truly spending tomorrow's cash today, and that they are truly on a debt prone treadmill, um, and not being wise with their money. But people will look at that and say, wow, I want their money. And I thought it was interesting that the real strong point that they made in this book was that the people that showed all these outward displays of affluence really weren't affluent, that it
Well,
was
that's
just,
right, Susan. And I think we forget about that because you don't realize that your other dental colleagues don't necessarily have much net worth. So they don't have much savings. They're just spending all of their money. And so you assume then that they're more successful than you, when in reality, they might be a few years behind on their taxes and they might not have
right.
saved anything for retirement. I mean, we have so many doctors who need to sell their practices because they're having health issues, but they really can't afford to because they haven't saved enough.
Well, they just sometimes, I will say, will spend way more than what they need to. They live well beyond their means, especially for the debt load they carry, for the debt load of the practice and the debt
Right.
load of their education. And so I think it's a real pitfall for potential new dentists that they need to be really frugal in everything, every spending habit, everything. Um, it's almost as if they don't ever have a hope of getting above the debt. And so they're going ahead and spending it anyway, just because they don't think they'll ever rise above it.
Right. Well, and Susan, when you just mentioned about fraud at the front desk, I'd like to go back to that for a minute because, this is kind of hard to imagine sometimes, but the average annual income that is earned in America is less than $60,000 a year. And what's interesting about that is that means that 4 out of 10 Americans can't even afford to pay a $400 surprise medical bill. 4 out of 10. That's
Wow.
40% of people, which is very high. And most of the people that are working in your offices are going to be in this type situation. I mean, we have more millionaires than we've ever had before. Yet, if you're not a millionaire, then the income level immediately drops to 60,000 or less on average per person. So, we have about 6.5% of Americans are millionaires, but the rest are in a situation where they're oftentimes finding it extremely difficult to pay their bills. They're living paycheck to paycheck. So when someone's at the front desk and is seeing this affluent lifestyle and just sees all the money coming in, they don't see all the expenses that the practice has, then that makes it very tempting for them to then find ways to pay themselves more because they feel they deserve it, or they can see that they have the opportunity to take it because that they know the doctor isn't looking at the right reports to even know what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's yeah, that's like 90% of my business.
Mhm.
Yeah, and just as a reminder, I can help you with that if you're one of those doctors that don't know what reports to watch. I have the Ask the Expert service that I can help you. And I love doing that. It's just so important for you to know the reports to look at and what to compare it with on the financial side.
It
Um,
is because just because you're sitting with a lot of cash right now does not mean you can get lazy about your habits of watching the money coming in and watching it go out. I mean, Susan, gosh, you have helped so many of my clients have the comfort of knowing that they have sound systems in place, that it is extremely difficult for someone to embezzle, but also you have helped them uncover embezzlement scenarios and how to deal with that team member and whether they're really the right person for that job.
yeah, it is why I love my job. I love doing stuff like that. And so and I love working with them to help them build a more secure and financially protected practice. And
Hmm.
so thanks for that. I appreciate that. Um,
Well, the second point we were going to talk about is that millionaires allocate their time, energy, and money efficiently in ways that are conducive to building wealth. And one of the keys to this is even really understanding, how do you define millionaire? A millionaire is someone who has at least $1 million of investable assets. And this is excluding real estate, those 401k plans that are employer sponsored, and your business. So these are the other assets that you have that would be investable. And that's really what people are focusing on who become millionaires, is how do they spend their time and energy to find ways to build that.
yeah, it's it's something they have to do as far as um, paying attention to it. I think it's probably the first thing they have to do. They've got to use accounting software for one of the things to help plan. But, and most of them will use an accounting software for their business, Kate, but very few of them will use accounting software for their personal expenses.
That's right. And that's where spending plans become vital. I usually work with my clients on those personal spending plans when they're wanting to now save more for retirement, or to even understand how much money do they need to save for retirement. And that's where our financial planning services are key, because you have to know where your money is going now to then be able to save money for the future, because you need to know how much money you can save each year and whether or not you need to force yourself to save even more money than you are right now to meet that future retirement goal of selling your practice at a certain age, or working part time at a certain age, or even changing careers.
Yeah, and I'll tell you that have told my clients before, I use QuickBooks, of course, obviously, QuickBooks for my business, but I use Quicken for my personal and have for years. I've been using both of them since they were DOS. And taught them both since DOS.
That's a
But
long time, Susan.
it is a really long time. But the Quicken, it's set up. All my personal goes through my Quicken. I have credit cards that are personal and I don't cross the line. And I have so many clients still, just had one that mix. She'll charge personal stuff on the business credit card. And I know that you guys as CPAs are really good about dividing that, but it shouldn't even be in there. Get a credit card for your business expenses and get a credit card for your personal expenses. And then set up something like Quicken. And there's so many personal software options, but Quicken is really easy to use.
It is,
Um,
and even QuickBooks is. So I
yeah,
have
you can
clients that use
have.
QuickBooks because they already know the software because they're using it for the practice, and you just set up a separate file for your personal, and then you can track all of your spending that way, and then you know exactly where your money's going. And you know, again, the word budget has a negative connotation associated with it, but I think of it as a spending plan because if you create a spending plan, then you truly know when you have money you can use for fun stuff and not feel guilty about it. So if you have an extra $100 in your pocket, you know whether or not that's actually extra money that can be spent on something that you want to spend it on that wasn't part of your fixed expenses for that month. So it gives you some more freedom to know when you truly have extra money to do something fun with it and not feel like it always has to all be invested or saved.
Well, and when you think about financial independence, you want to be able to monitor everything. And yes, it takes time. I can just hear them say it just takes too much time.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to be financially independent, yeah, it's going to take some focus. You're going to have to expend, number two, they allocate their time, energy, and money efficiently in ways conducive to building wealth. That means you do have to oversee it. And so, that financial independence is really important. Now, I'll say, interestingly enough, several of my embezzlement cases, the embezzler has driven a luxury car of far greater value than the doctor.
Yes, we have seen that.
Yeah. And so the social status, I think that's the thing. When you think again about wealth, immediately people think of those that exhibit wealth in a social status possession. And that's not what we're talking about. But the social status is important to an embezzler. And I think that plays along with their greed. In fact, the Collins Street Bakery embezzlement, I did a podcast with Teresa Duncan on the Collins Street Bakery. And so this is a shout out to Teresa. She is all things podcast and very much all things insurance. Amazing. And we have so much fun together, like you and I, Kate, when we do a podcast. But I did one on the Collins Street Bakery. But it was a great example, that embezzlement case, because he stole specifically for social status. It had nothing to do with financial independence. In fact, I've not had one embezzler that stole for financial independence. They stole for social status. Isn't that interesting?
That really is hard to imagine because you would think they would be stealing for other reasons.
No. In fact, I thought it was funny that the name of the chapter that started discussing number two, that common factor, was "You aren't what you drive." I thought that's
Yeah.
a really good thing since I drive a 2014 GMC and will probably drive that for another 10 years. And I just bought it the end of 2019. And so that made me feel better when the author stated that most millionaires hadn't purchased a car in the last 2 years, and that 57, this was interesting, 57.7% bought American.
It is really interesting. And as we learn from the book too, dry cleaners tend to be one of the largest groups of millionaires. And part of it is
Wow.
because we don't have any expectation for what a dry cleaner should be driving. So it's acceptable
Ah,
for them to
that's
drive
true.
a less expensive, older car because no one has the expectation of them living what we oftentimes think of as a doctor's lifestyle.
I thought it was because they found all the uncashed lottery tickets in people's pockets.
Now that could be too.
Even as a single female, I have very rarely ever bought new. I'll say that because and I know lots of people that will buy a new car because they're afraid of breaking down. Well, that's what AAA is for. And it's a whole lot less expensive to get AAA or OnStar than it is to buy a brand new car. Here's another quote from the book. Behind their frugal behavior is a strong set of beliefs. First, they believe in the benefits of being financially independent. I'd say that has to be first. Second, they believe that being frugal is the key to achieving independence. They inoculate themselves from heavy spending, good choice of words, by constantly reminding themselves that the people that have the status items have little wealth. I just, that was really interesting to me.
I think that's a great quote. And our dental clients are the ones who are in the position to benefit from being frugal because they could be saving over 20% of their income each year because, the number of people that are earning over $400,000 a year are only about 1.8% of Americans. So if you think about that, many
Wow.
dentists are in at least the top 1.8% of American earners, but many dentists are making much more than that. And that puts them in about the top 0.5% of wage earners. So the potential is there to create the revenue and then be able to save it for the future.
Well, but let's talk brass tacks, bottom line. Um, what is their net profit? What are you seeing, Kate, as far as their net profit in the end?
Well, the net profit that I typically see from a practice is around 45 to 55% right now. It's changing because of the COVID scenario, but we're finding net profit increasing more than we have in the prior year. So we've seen an increase
Oh,
in that. And then as far as net worth goes, we're normally finding that only about 3% of people have net worth of over $1 million. And that is, of course, looking at what your net worth is after you take into account the debt that you have.
right. So 3% of the dentist.
It's a larger group than that. I would say that this is 3% overall of Americans who are earning money. So it's not just dentistry. And dentistry, I'm finding that unfortunately it's an even lower percentage than that because their debt tends to be higher and they're not saving as much as some of the other people are in other types of business.
Yeah, so I hope if you are newly out of um, school, dental school, and newly purchased a practice, or let's just say below 40, actually, let's just say everybody, I hope that you listen to that because I think the younger ones tend to be more frustrated at not having money because school was so expensive. And so the result is they spend money as soon as they get it because they want to drive a really nice car and not um, be mindful of future. But the cool thing is that if you're mindful of the future now, then you might be able to spend that later. Um,
That's true. You might. And actually, on a positive note, Susan, I am seeing more and more of the students coming out of my dental classes that are wanting to save for retirement very early. And this
awesome.
is one of the important messages that I would share is that even if you can only save a few $1,000s a year, it's extremely valuable to start that habit from day one that you have a job or own your own practice because you're creating the habit of saving for yourself first because you're saving for your future. And oftentimes you find you can save even more than that very quickly. I have a number of young dentists who are starting their SEP IRAs very early, and they're saving 25% of their income and teaching themselves to live off the rest of the income that they're earning. So I think, especially those of you who have jobs in corporate dentistry where you are earning some very large salaries when you're first coming out, you have that potential to really start saving from the very beginning.
Yeah, but it's still going to have to be in such a way that you are mindful of what you're making and what you're spending in the other areas. And so you have to be able to track that. And I know that you can look at your bank account, and some of the banks have now a way that you can say what it was for and track it that way. Some of the credit cards, American Express, Citibank, I think, has that too, that you can say what that expense was for. But it's not the same as using in a software that all of that downloads into. And so if you get that on the personal side, just as you should be doing with your business, not only does it make your taxes so much easier at the end of the year, but you really do get a clear picture. I know that one of the things that I heard, I think it was, Susie Orman may have said this. I've listened to her for years. In fact, I love the section of her old TV series where somebody would call up and say, "Can I buy my boyfriend a motorcycle?" And she'd have them come up and say, they had to say how much they made and how much debt they had. And, she'd always end up saying, "No, you fool. Why are you buying your boyfriend a motorcycle?" She was hilarious to listen to. But I think it might have been her that said, "Write down everything you spend." And I mean, it was almost a pre-software mentality to write it all down. But I don't think we realize what we spend.
That's right.
Um,
It's too easy to just spend the money without knowing exactly where it goes. So I think that is definitely an important first step is being honest with yourself and your spouse if you're married about where your money is actually going. And don't beat each other over the head with that information or try to, create guilt for anyone, but it's the only way you can start to understand what's currently happening with your money to then create new goals. And I really believe that if you don't have any specific goals for your future, then you're never going to get there. You're not
right.
going to know if you accomplished your goal because you never set one. So, the best way to accomplish future financial goals is to set those goals and then update them if you need to along the way.
Well, in financial independence, that is the mindset. That's one of the biggest thing that the book talked about was financial independence. Um, that third thing that they believe financial independence is the more important than displaying high social status. And so, if you keep the financial independence forethought in your mind, it will keep you from it will keep you from shopping the aisle of shame at Aldi's on the way home. I told Kate a story about wanting to shop at Aldi's on Wednesday morning. If you have not heard about Aldi's, it's a store and they have an aisle of shame that bargains are on, and it's just a kind of a nerd thing. But anyways, but financial independence, I mean, it's like stamped on my forehead. And so, that was my choice on Wednesday morning, not to shop at Aldi's. But,
Well,
a
sometimes
lot,
it's those small decisions, Susan, that really make all of the difference because it's amazing when you run the calculations to see how much money you would have saved if you didn't buy the Starbucks every day or if you
exactly.
didn't spend a little bit of extra money each month on the Mercedes as opposed to a different car choice that you might have had in mind. So, I think all we can do is the best we can do each day and each week on trying to make sound financial decisions for ourselves so that we do have that opportunity in the future to be able to have the flexibility to not have to work.
One of the things when I do a Ask the Expert, sometimes we'll actually look at the QuickBooks setup and look at some of the percentages of income each one of the areas
Right.
is allocated. And I'm always surprised that they have no idea. They'll look at something from a credit card and they have no idea exactly what that charge is. Well, I had to say, you better find out what those charges are because you're paying for them. And so, and just as much personally. I mean, one of the things during the pandemic that I did was again using Quicken. I download all my credit cards. And so I went through the credit card charges that are automatic and went, okay, I can put the YMCA on hold because obviously not going during a pandemic. And
Mm-hmm.
there were a couple of other things I could eliminate that keeps that credit card being charged so much every month. So there are things that we can do, again, keeping that financial independence stamped on our foreheads. And the available cash flow, wow. I mean, that's so important. Have we not learned that this last year? Just having that available cash flow?
It makes a big difference to have that cash saved up because even in normal times, it doesn't take that much of a change in your business to see a dip in your income. So there are plenty of times where you can have business interruptions, such as losing your key front desk person or your key hygienist. All of that can affect cash flow. So having extra cash saved up in the business in addition to personal is key because that way, if something happens or the compressor blows up, you don't have to pull out a credit card and possibly pay some really high
Yeah.
interest rates there. You don't have to immediately go apply for another loan or a line of credit. So, having that extra cash really gives you more flexibility to be stable and be able to weather some of these other small business interruptions.
You know, do you remember when credit cards were for emergency purposes?
Gosh, that feels like a long time ago, doesn't it?
I mean, seriously. My parents had one credit card, but they didn't have a credit card when I was growing up. It wasn't a thing. And when they did have a credit card, it was for emergency only. And so, I mean, again, we are in a buy today, borrow one tomorrow mentality that it's not for emergencies. And I've started to put that back on again. You know, as I reread some of the things that were in this book, it was, it was it was like the church I used to go to where the preacher stepped on my toes every Sunday. But as I was reading the book, I felt the same of, okay, I needed to be reminded of that. You know, yes, yes, financial independence, stamp that on your forehead, Susan.
Well,
Um,
that's the thing. If people are keeping a credit card balance and not paying it off every month, then in essence, they're oftentimes spending 110% of what they make or something because they're spending money that they don't really have. Like you say, it used to be that people were spending money only if they had that cash sitting there to spend.
oh, yeah. Well, and that's what I've said so many times too. And I know I've said it on a podcast before that when you own a business and I go shopping, I think, how long did I have to work to buy this?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Because that's the reality. How long did I have to work to buy this? And do I really need it? And do I really want it? And will I really use it? So, but it is a mentality and it's a discipline. Holy moly. It's a discipline to keep that car on the road driving past Aldi's when you really want to pull in the parking lot.
That's right. But our dentists who are listening today absolutely have the wherewithal to be able to earn the income and
Yes.
save the income to really change the future for not only themselves, but also their children if they have children.
Yeah, exactly. Because the fourth one that we're really not going to talk about other than to say the fourth foundation that they found in the affluent that was similar with each one is that their parents did not provide economic outpatient care. And so that means not bailing out your kids every time they get into a bit of a bind, but letting them figure it out, letting them own their own. outlook and their own financial independence or their own financial bondage. Sometimes that would be really hard to do. And I know I'm speaking from not having any kids, but I think that's real important because as they are watching you, I watched my dad. I mean, frugal, frugal, frugal. I learned from him. And that plays back in my head so many times um, that we mentor to those that we're around the most. And so if I get something I don't necessarily need and is extremely frugal, then other people see that. That's why I'm content to drive a 2014 GMC. Um, but it's a really nice 2014 GMC.
Well, I know that we're about to run out of time, Susan, but since you brought up kids, I can't help but mention that it's wise to be saving for your own retirement first instead of paying for your kids' college. So if you haven't saved enough for your own retirement, save for your retirement first because you can always take out a loan to pay for college, but you can't take out a loan to pay for your own retirement.
That's really wise. Very, very good wisdom. That is very good wisdom. Yeah, and they really need to. I know there's a book and a podcast and a training thing, Profit First, that teaches some things that I don't necessarily agree with opening up all the thousands of bank accounts that they recommend. But I do recommend that you pay yourself first. And part of that paying yourself first is setting aside for retirement.
That's
And
right.
as long as you've got that steady income coming in and things are doing what they need to do, then that's great advice there, Kate. There's another book that I talk about. I took care of my parents for 16 years. That's why I have so many parent stories. But I took care of my parents. And when I was in the ER one time with Dad, I think it was, one of his doctors and I were talking about a book called Family Wealth, Keeping It in the Family by James Hugh. It was a study on family wealth being passed down through the generations. Not exactly what we've been talking about in the Millionaire Next Door, but and what happened within the family to cause it to succeed or to fail. And in the book, it included a study on the Kennedys and their importance of annual family meetings. Well, that, of course, is real important. And I think your kids need to be a part of that conversation to let them know, as my dad used to say, money doesn't grow on trees, right? We've all heard that a million
We
gazillion
have.
times.
Gosh, my dad used to say that too.
Oh, I think everybody's dad said that, Kate, especially when we asked them for something that they didn't want to pay for.
That's
But
right.
I'm pretty sure that's when that came up. But I wrote about that in the book, Matters of the Heart, that I wrote about generational caregiving. I talked about the importance of having a family meeting to ensure the conversation is known by all parties. In fact, I do that now with, not having kids. My niece and my nephew annually, I get together and I talk about my business and how that's going, any debt that I have, and where my retirement's at so that they fully know. I mean, we don't know. The beer truck could hit me on the way home sometime. I mean, I have to actually get out for it to hit me on the way home. But that, I mean, it could happen as we've seen now. I mean, people have gotten COVID and died in the hospital within a week. So loving on your family means you've got those things taken care of and they know what they need to be aware of and they know where the expenses are and all the financial information.
And that can take a lot of courage to be willing to share financial information with your family members, particularly your kids, because a lot of people are afraid to talk about money and they feel like it's not a public topic. But if you're really going to save for the future wisely and you want to become wealthier, then it is key to be talking with your family about what your plans are, what you have put in place to protect them and yourselves and your spouse if you're married, and for them to even know where your important financial documents are. as you mentioned, with health, even having healthcare directives and making sure that they know where that is. You can even have a codicil to your will for your practice so that if an emergency happened, you've already designated who you want to be contacted by the family to sell your practice at the highest possible amount for your family.
Yeah, and that's true love, really caring about your family enough to get all those things in order and sharing it with them. And I have this conversation a lot with kids whose parents have not shared that information with them, and they don't even know how to breach the subject because their parents have been so closed off in having that conversation. So, you know what? If anything has taught us that um, life can be fragile. wait, frugal. That was a Freudian slip, right? Life can be fragile, and we don't necessarily know the days that we have. Um, we need to really take care of that and have that all packaged as much as we can, prepared for any emergency that might be ahead. Well, that was a lot of information. Do you have any last words for us, Kate?
Well,
Anything
I
we've
am
missed?
excited about everyone using this time at the beginning of the new year to get refocused on what their future goals are and to start to set some of those goals. And they don't have to be huge. So just start with something small and make it a promise to yourself to be able to provide for your future in the way that you want to. And then that's going to make the savings all worthwhile.
Yeah, no kidding. Financial independence.
That's right. That's the key.
It is the key.
Well, it was great spending time with you again today, Susan.
Oh, thank you so much, Kate. I just really appreciate the conversations we always have. And I just wanted to say, in wrapping this up, since I've read this book again, I look at luxury cars, boats, RVs, cabins, beach homes, all very differently now. My goddaughter and her family from Malawi were here recently for a visit. So we watched, oh my gosh, we watched My Lottery Dream Home on TV. And one of the shows that we watched, of all the shows that we watched, no one was wealthy before winning the lottery. I thought that was interesting. Some were living in fairly dire circumstances. And interestingly enough, they spent rationally to purchase a home. They didn't overspend. I was truly surprised at their financial control at having money when they didn't have it before. It was surprising and a little contradiction to spending what they didn't have for the actual lottery ticket, but they did exhibit the financial control when they did have it. In contrast, we've all watched game shows where they risked everything for the higher dollar amount only to lose and walk away with nothing. That happens a lot too, right? This book that we talked about was published 25 years ago, and I still loved being reminded reading the content. In fact, at every page turn, it somewhat felt like hearing a scream from beyond from my dad to quit spending by ordering crap on Amazon. I could just hear him saying that. This book teaches a perspective about money that is seldom discussed, but it should be within every family, just like what we were talking about a minute ago. It's a savings mindset to look for deals and to use coupons. There's nothing to be talked down about that. Living with overwhelming debt is not normal. Accumulating things, that's not financially healthy. And your kids are watching. I learned from my dad, as I said. Honestly, I didn't understand his frugality when I was growing up. But thankfully, as I said before, both my parents had the means to live at home until they passed away. This may or may not be a popular podcast, but because of what I've seen on various dental practices QuickBooks I've worked on, because of what I've seen in the various embezzlement cases I've worked on, because of the opulence that I have seen sometimes, and because of the heartbreaking phone calls I received when practices were shut down, I felt like this podcast was entirely necessary and timely. We must learn to be frugal, to set aside for retirement, as Kate just said, and to pay off debt. To pay off debt. Okay, I'm speaking to myself as well. 25 years, again, have passed since this book was published, but the glaring habits of the wealthy-minded remain the same. Isn't that amazing? It's a good read, and I hope you've hearing about the secrets of America's wealthy. But as an aside, these days, being wealthy in our hearts is also direly needed. Just as you store up investments and retirement, please store up kindness and compassion. It is sorely, sorely needed. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to share this podcast with your friends and colleagues. Thanks again, Kate, and stay tuned for February 1st when Janice Jansen and I will discuss another headline embezzlement case in the embezzlement news. Until then, be safe. These are completely unprecedented times, still a year later in so many ways. Take care.
That's a wrap for this podcast of Money In, Money Out. Thanks for listening. Be sure to write down the most valuable tip you learned today so you don't forget it. And remember, you can find out more about all the valuable books and services Susan has to offer at www.susangunsolutions.com.